Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Mary Kate Francis, and I will be moderating today's webinar, How to Benchmark Social Data to Drive ROI, with Divya Dutt, Senior Demand Generation Marketing Manager at Marketo, and Greg Roth, Director of Product Marketing at Synthesio. So before we get started, I'm just going to talk through a couple housekeeping items. First of all, this webinar is being recorded. So we will be sending the slides and recording to you after the webinar, either later today or tomorrow. And if you have any questions at all during the presentation, please use the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, and we will try to get to your questions after the webinar. And if you have anything you'd like to post about on social media today, please use our hashtag #MKTGNation. And then finally, there is a brief survey after the webinar that we would love if you could stick around for. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it on over to Divya to get us started.
All right, thank you so much, MK. Well, today we're going to cover a couple of things. I'm going to start with talking about the marketing challenge that most marketers are facing today. And then we're going to move on to how to use social as a tool to stand out and communicate with the buyer across their entire journey. And then I'm going to finally talk about how to define your objectives and metrics for when you're running social campaigns. All right, as we are all aware that today's buyer is really different and more empowered than ever before. They like to research, read reviews online, and form opinions about a brand well before they've even chosen to interact with your brand. And in addition to that, it's really hard to get their attention. I mean, most buyers today are just inundated with so many different messages. We all receive about 2,900 messages per day, out of which we might recognize about 50 and then only end up recalling 3 or 4 messages. So given all this, it's like really getting hard for the marketer to reach the buyer that they want to. So I think the one thing that most marketers really agree on is that the way to really stand out is by delivering personalized, engaging messages that are really relevant to the buyer and as well as very timely. And actually most buyers these days really expect every experience to be engaging. They're probably not even going to look at an ad that's not relevant and that's not speaking to them. So then the big question for the marketers is, how do we make our interactions relevant as well as timely? So I think the big answer really is to listen to your buyers. Marketing these days is all about listening to what the buyers are telling you. Social media, as we know, has become a really important and powerful tool for all marketers, since not only does it help us to listen, but also really respond to the marketer respond to your buyers in real time. It lets us know which content, events, products they're really responding to and engaging with, and also not engaging with. So as marketers, once we have this information, we can really make our marketing messages more engaging, meaningful, and most importantly, timely throughout the buyer's journey. Now, as you might have noticed, I've mentioned the buyer's journey a couple of times during this presentation. So, what is a buyer's journey? Well, it's just basically the different stages a buyer goes through before and after they have turned into a customer. So one thing I want to really clarify here is that as a marketer, we're not the people who are creating a buyer's journey. They're doing that all by themselves. But what we can do is really map out their journey to the best ability that we can, and then really trying to be, as marketers, be helpful to the buyer throughout their journey so that they can really keep us top of mind. And that's the most important thing. And so at Marketo, what we started doing is we started thinking about social very differently in the last year or so. We don't just think that it's a great tool for awareness and engagement anymore, but we've really started incorporating it, and we also think that it's a very important tool throughout the entire journey, all the way from awareness to advocacy. So we've really started using social as a tool for retention, for advocacy, for purchase, and that's where we can really make a difference because, again, as I mentioned, this is a tool that you can use in real time. So listen and engage and respond in real time. And we'll come back to more about that in a bit. So we know that we need to listen and respond throughout the buyer's journey. Now let's talk about how do you find out where the buyer is in their journey. So I think one of the main things that we use at Marketo for doing this is really lead scoring. And I know there are other ways that you can do this, but if you have a marketing automation system, then you probably want to use lead scoring. And lead scoring is a way to prioritize your leads and send the hottest leads to sales for follow-up. And your lead scoring will include, the demographic fit of a person, their interests, their behavior, and all that can be helpful and be used to really communicate with them and serve them the content that they would really need most in the particular stage that they are at. So if someone has a low lead score, you're going to show them a very different type of content than when someone has a high lead score. Let me show that to you by going through an example so it'll be a little more clear. So if someone has a light score and they're just starting to get to know your company a little bit, you might want to show them a funny video. And again, you will not score this video very high because it's a lot easier to get somebody engaged into watching a funny video than get them to really sit down and watch a 30-minute demo of a product. So if somebody's watching light content, you will also score it very differently than when somebody is watching a product demo. So an early content will be maybe 5 or 10 points. If somebody is really engaging with a cheat sheet and spending more time engaging with a couple of blogs plus a cheat sheet, you might score them somewhere around 40 because they've spent some time downloading an actual white paper or cheat sheet and are learning about how to solve a particular problem. And then, as I mentioned, if they're really engaging with a demo and spending 30 minutes on a demo, you definitely want to score them a lot higher, and that would be a hot lead that you want to pass on to sales right away. All right, so, at the end of the day, social is, again, just a medium that you're using, but content is king. So people are engaging with you on social and other channels, giving you the information that they're interested in. Now, it is your job as a marketer to give them what they want. People respond very differently on different platforms too. So again, you have to keep that in mind. You want to know your audience really well and think about, where your audience is really spending a lot of their time. Is it on Facebook? Is it on LinkedIn? Is it on Twitter? And what kind of content are they consuming? And again, going back to their lead scores and thinking about which stage they might be in the buyer circle and then in the buyer's journey, and then really serving up the content that would fit them the best and would be most timely during that stage. So again, content is king. At the end of the day, all the channels that you're using are just medium, but the way to connect with the buyer is also giving them relevant content. Now I just want to walk you through an example of something that we tried at Marketo and we saw great results with. So here's an example of creating a campaign for a very specific audience. So we had some healthcare people that we know were in our database, and we wanted to give them a more personalized experience than somebody who was just looking for marketing automation. So what we did was we created a custom audience and we pushed it on Facebook. And so we know these people are interested in the healthcare. Then we looked at their scores at where they were. If they were just in the awareness stage, they just got an ungated blog from us. If they had gone down the stage and had looked at an ebook or had a higher score, we then gave them an ebook. And this was not just any ebook. We actually geared it towards the healthcare industry. So we said, how do you leverage digital marketing in the healthcare industry versus just saying, what are the benefits of marketing automation and how it can help you? Obviously, if you're a healthcare professional and you see this ad on your Facebook post, this is going to be a lot more intriguing to you than when it just says, generic marketing automation ad from Marketo. So we did this with both healthcare as well as the educational industry, and we saw about 2 times increase in our conversion rates by running very personalized ads that were based on people's interests, their scores, and giving them what they really wanted. So, one more thing I wanted to mention before we really jump into metrics, since we're talking about the audience, we're talking about the content you want to serve them, I also wanted to touch a little bit about the different targeting options out there. And social is becoming really great. Facebook and both LinkedIn are doing a great job by having, really letting you choose campaigns that are very smart, so you can really target people based on interest, their custom audiences, again, by scores. And obviously, if you have a marketing automation system, you can really push these audiences out in a much easier way by using partners that can talk to your marketing automation system and will help you push very smart data into custom audiences through Facebook and Twitter, etc. And I'm sure Greg will go into this in more details later, but I just wanted to touch that there are a lot of great advanced ways of targeting, and you don't just have to only target people based on demographics and number of employees anymore. You can definitely use scoring, marketing automation lists, lookalike audiences, followers, and skills, and then obviously make your campaigns a lot more targeted to the audience. All right. So before we go ahead and talk about creating your campaigns and what kind of programs you need to run to generate awareness and engagement, I just wanted to say, as a best practice internally at Marketo, the way we always do it is we really define our objectives and our metrics for each of the stages of the buyer's journey. For example, if we are looking at the awareness stage, we all come to an agreement that this is an awareness stage. This is early interest. We're just generating interest. A lot of the content is probably not going to be gated at this stage. And the metrics that we're looking at are going to be impressions and reach and increased views on our site. And the main business impact that we're really driving for is to create share of voice, to increase share of my voice and top of mind awareness. So once everybody is very clear about the objectives, it's a lot easier to then really say what are the main metrics, and then obviously the programs that will help us drive these goals that we have in mind. So in the end, I just want to touch on the metrics that really matter. Obviously, a lot of you have probably heard of top of the funnel metrics, middle of the funnel, and bottom of the funnel metrics. But what they really are, so at the top, you're normally looking at, my reach. How many people am I engaging on a daily basis? How many conversions am I getting? And obviously, if you are an online marketer, a manager, social media manager, these metrics are super important to you because you need to see where your audience is, which audience or platforms giving you the most conversions. So these metrics will be important to you. But if you are actually reporting out to your senior VP of marketing or your CMO, then the metrics that really start mattering more to you are the metrics like marketing qualified leads, your sales qualified leads, also your pipeline and revenue. At the end of the day, that's key, and that's what everybody's looking at. So I would say the metrics that matter are really your pipeline, your revenue, and your customer long-term value. And social is a huge driver in all of this these days. At Marketo, we track all these programs by creating programs in Marketo and using our own marketing automation system to track every single ad and the revenue generated by each ad. So I can really go back very confidently to my senior VP and say, I ran this campaign on Facebook, and here are the actual dollar values that were generated. So I've seen 3:1 or 4:1, 5:1 pipeline being generated by a lot of the campaigns that I'm running. And again, like I said, you just need to have clear objectives and make sure that you're really tracking everything and testing and constantly testing and iterating your campaigns to create the best optimization and return on spend on your investment. And social is a great, great, great way to do that. Now, finally, I'm just going to end with some key takeaways. As I mentioned, social can help us throughout the buyer's journey, so please don't just use social as a top-of-mind lead generation type of a tool. Please use it through the entire journey. You can really use social to create advocacy. You can use social to create retention. If somebody complains on Twitter, you can get back to them right away in real time, and that's very powerful. So make sure that you take that away from today's presentation. Also, serve relevant content based on the buyer's journey. And then social is not just a channel. Of course, you obviously need great content and offers so that whatever the buyer is getting becomes more and more relevant. Please define your objectives and metrics for each stage. It will just help everybody be on the same page. And then track your social efforts so you can really iterate and improve from there. All right, with that, I would just like to pass it on to Greg Roth, who's the Director of Product Marketing at Synthesio. Take it away, Greg. All yours.
All right. Thank you very much. So one of the things that I think will make this transition a lot easier is what was just talked about in terms of metrics that matter. And this is something that we struggle at Synthesio. We're a social intelligence company, and explaining what that means really comes down to describing the metrics that matter. So, you know, a lot of people have heard of social listening, and they think that that is just a process by which you drag in all the related mentions to your brand and then display that in the dashboard. Synthesio, you know, aspires to be greater than that and move from that listening stage, as you'll see on the slide, to social intelligence. So what you're looking at here is basically a circuit. And each one of these circuits will operate independently, but they operate best when they're all connected together. And you're building up from the bottom to the top to create these KPIs that connect your social listening program to overall business impact. So as I mentioned earlier, listening in its rawest stage is about raw data. You're a brand, you're interested in what people are saying about you online, you build some basic queries to drag in mentions based on the keywords that you're looking for, and your output is basically what is your share of voice, what percentage of the audience that is talking about any given topic is talking about your brand or product. And on the right side you have the reach, which would be your kind of amplification KPI in terms of how far is your brand messaging reaching, how far is the messaging of other people talking about your brand reaching in terms of the audience, the eyeballs, the impressions that you're getting off of these mentions and conversations that are going on online. As you step up this progression, the KPIs become a bit more complex, and so does the analysis that goes into the data that you're looking at. So we're still going to be looking at share of voice and reach as we step up the circuit, but now we're going to be adding sentiment and demographics to that equation. So sentiment, you know, is basically a complex process that could be described simply as looking for certain positive and negative keywords within any given sentence and then grading those positive and negative keywords and giving an overall score to a conversation or mention that's happening online based on the frequency of those positive and negative words. So what we're doing is processing all of that in-house through machine learning and complex algorithms, and we're spitting out results that are grading each and every post that people make on social media about a topic that we're tracking. Now the nice thing to add to that when you're looking at enriching data is you know, we've got what people feel, but now who are these people? So adding in a demographics layer by being able to scrape user profiles and biographies and come up with a clearer picture of who these people are that are talking about your brand will enrich that data. So now it goes beyond listening to raw data. It really becomes about measuring enriched data. But you could still step it up one level beyond that, and that really is kind of the place on the social maturity curve that we're pushing our clients to get to. It's this area of social intelligence and actionable data. It's really taking the insights and the metrics that you're reading in your social listening dashboard and elevating them to a place where they're having an impact on your overall business. So on the left-hand side you see influence, and that's kind of really amorphous term. Different brands, different agencies, different companies define that word differently. For simplicity's sake today, what I'll say is influence is the power that your brand has to incent users to talk and share. It's really like what power do they have over users to influence conversations, to get them talking. Now, is it a proactive power or is it a reactive power? that becomes something that you can study in deeper detail. Are people going out of their way to talk about you, or are they only talking about your brand when you start the conversation? On the opposite side of the circuit there, you have ROI, and ROI is typically defined as return on investment. In this case, what I'm going to call it is return on impact. So what you're looking at is how are you realizing your investment in social listening? How are you making all of these metrics make sense for your brand and then pushing that to an actionable program? So you have to ask yourself the questions at this point. Does your volume or sentiment translate to success in the case of if you had benchmarked early on that you're generating a low volume and very negative sentiment and you turn those numbers around? Is that your return on impact? Are you hitting the audiences that you wanted to hit? So, you might be getting a ton of volume coming in about your brand, but that volume is coming from the wrong place. You might be looking for single moms in the Midwest, and you're only hitting single dads in the Northeast. And then, you could ask yourself, is the messaging providing evidence that we're driving consumers to purchase? So if you're not seeing that evidence, if you're not seeing that return on impact, then you know that something can be done to provide action to this program. So what I'm going to show you now is a whole bunch of a progression of use cases that could help you reach this point where you're realizing this return on investment or your return on your impact. So if you look at this chart here, you see it's a really basic graph in terms of we're looking at social maturity, and this is how brands really step up the scale when it comes to leveraging a social media program. And what I've done is tied this to basically the stages of the customer life cycle that we define in terms of listening being a very tactical discipline. It's all about kind of knowing the basics about the customer and the competitive set that you're working in, and then stepping up to that strategic level of measurement of enriched data, really analyzing the customer. How do they feel? Who are they in terms of their demographics, their gender, their interests? Where do they live? What languages do they speak? And then stepping up to that final level of intelligence of realizing whether or not your investment in all of these social media activities across the board are generating a positive impact for your brand. And that doesn't necessarily have to be dollars, because we're not talking about ad buys here. It's all about turning the needle in the right direction, getting positive volume, and getting people to talk about your brand proactively. So what I'll show you here is some ways you can start to do that. Some of these are reactive ways. Some of these are ways to really build up the strategy around all of the listening you're doing. So I mentioned earlier that these circuits operate independently. They could also be kind of clicked together. And as we step up the progression here, we step up in complexity. So when we identify and measure this stage of the customer life cycle, this is the early stage. This would be an early client for us who is just getting started in social listening. So what we'll do is we'll define a few use cases based around the basics of share of voice and reach. These are volume metrics. They're really, really easy to understand, and they're easy to start tracking because you're just talking about percentages here. So in terms of these four use cases, I'll start in the upper right. The competitive analysis is obviously the simplest use case when it comes to social listening. You have an automobile company. You have 4 competitors. You build your queries around that competitive set to drag in all mentions around maybe reliability and price, and you have built yourself a competitive analysis. So you're basing that primarily on share of voice. Then you've got your tactical campaign performance. If you put out a ton of messaging as a brand, what kind of resonance does that have? That's all about reach. How far is your messaging going? How far are your consumers and fans taking that messaging beyond your profile page? We've got alerting, which is a really basic volume strategy when it comes to determining whether or not you want to send automated notifications to your team if volume or sentiment goes up or above or below a certain threshold. So if you set a benchmark of your positive sentiment being at 75% and you set an alert for an automatic notification each time it drops below 70%, you can be way ahead of the game when it comes to crisis and your brand. The final thing here is market research, and that's trend identification. And this is something that we get asked an awful lot about, and it's a super complex process. But at its simplest level, it's not all that complex. It's a matter of looking at share of voice and volume over time and seeing where peaks happen when it comes to the entire data set of mentions. So when there is a spike in volume for a given brand or keyword or term, that means that there is something causing people to talk. Now, it could be a crisis, but it could also be something that's trending on the internet at the time that you're going to be able to grab and take action on. So as we step up this progression ladder here to this enriched data and measurement, remember now we're still considering these two major KPIs of share of voice and reach, and we're adding to them this enriched data of how people feel and who they are with demographics and sentiment. And then you can start to do some really cool things in these use cases in terms of audience segmentation. Now that you've got all of these different buckets that you could put people into based on their age, their location, their language, the things that they like, you can start to segment that audience, and this is really where you begin to take action and leverage your social ecosystem and push out those segmented lists to your software like Marketo so that you can begin to inform the other marketing programs that you have based on the data that's coming in. On the right-hand side, you've got perception analysis, and this is super important for brands that are looking to see if a product launch is resonating with an audience. So really digging down into the mentions and exploring the sentiment around each mention that people are making is really succeeding with this perception analysis. In terms of measuring community impact and campaign, again, this is coming back to that share of voice and how far is the messaging traveling and how many people are talking about your brand. But it's also a little bit about finding out who is talking about your brand and whether or not you've hit your targets for your campaign. Many times your campaigns are intended to be directed at a niche audience and they end up hitting a wide audience or vice versa. So this is a great way to determine whether or not you've succeeded there. And then again with hot button topic identification, this is an analysis rather than of spikes in volume. This is an analysis of spikes in sentiment to determine whether or not there are certain topics around your brand that make people feel especially good or make them feel especially bad. Moving on to the last circuit, we've got the peak, the pinnacle of this mountain of social maturity, and that's social intelligence, and it's really leveraging this actionable data. So now, in addition to the 4 metrics we were talking about before, we've layered in influence and ROI as part of this equation, and you can start to look at an even deeper analysis of the audience and conversations that are going on around your brand. So in the upper left, for instance, influencer identification, now you've broken down all of your audience into segments and demographics, and you can start to really study who's having an impact, who's sharing your messaging and having other people share it, who's talking about your brand and starting conversations about the keywords that are relevant to your products and services. So this is a really important part that kind of adds up with the other 3 here when it comes to customer experience analysis. So your influencers are really going to be a huge part in driving what people are saying about the customer experience, because these are the people who are going online, unwrapping products on YouTube, posting those videos and getting millions and millions of views. You really want to be able to tie your stages of your customer life cycle to these KPIs at the end of the circuit here, because what you're going to be able to do is see who's pushing people to purchase and who is stopping people from purchase. That, again, adds up to campaign ROI. If you've built an advertising campaign around a specific product or service, you're going to be able to start to track that success over time, whether it comes down to comparing it to a campaign from a past year or whether it is just about analyzing the specifics around how you've had an impact on influencers or particular audience groups. This is where you're going to get to the bottom of whether or not you spent your money wisely. And then on the last corner here, when it comes to crisis, you've got advocate and detractor identification. So this is kind of the opposite of influencer identification. What you're doing is proactively going out of your way to find users who are talking about your brand either positively or negatively. That will allow you to stave off crisis ahead of time by really activating these positive users to continue to spread that positive messaging and really putting the tampers on the negative users and allowing their negative feelings to boil over time rather than at the wrong time. Now, when we look at this final circuit here, you'll see what this all adds up to. This is all about benchmarking social data to uncover global metrics, social ROI, and competitive intelligence. So when you put all of these things together, this is a fully realized, socially mature program. We're talking 2 to 3 years in the making. So the most important thing about benchmarking is that typically it takes time. Sure, you can benchmark your volume week to week and month to month, but you might not be getting the insights that you need without a huger data set. So when I'm talking about this completed circuit here, we're talking about maybe 2 to 3 years of data that you've been able to look at and track over time. This will give you your campaign ROI benchmarks. You'll be able to know if I ran a Black Friday campaign for the past 2 years, this was the volume that I had, this was the sentiment that I had, this is what people were talking about, and you can start to compare and contrast to take action on your marketing and communication programs for this year's campaign. When it comes to influencer impact, you can always see a short-term impact with an influencer, but over time, you're really going to be able to see how they're influencing people to talk about your brand, whether it's positive, whether it's negative, whether this is somebody who's consistent in their influence or somebody who just is putting out one post that has tremendous influence. So what I mean by that is, for instance, if Kim Kardashian tweets about Levi's jeans one time, she's going to reach 20 million followers. But if she tweets about Alpo dog products 20 times, that's going to be a much, much higher impact. So when it comes down to influencer impact, it's really about what is the impact these people are having over time. Crisis impact analysis is, again, this is a long-term metric. So what we're looking at here is, have we had several crises? How have we acted? How have we reacted to each one of these crises? And can we redefine what our thresholds are for alerts when it comes to what we consider to be dangerous levels of sentiment and volume? And then to wrap it all up at the bottom is the brand equity analysis. And what this really means is you're taking into account all of your crisis management programs, all of your market research programs, all of your campaign analysis programs, and you're rolling them up into a single kind of unified dashboard that will allow you to see what kind of impact have I had over time. And this is really where benchmarking comes into play. And it walks us back to that slide that we saw at the beginning when it comes to social maturity and business intelligence. It's really walking up the scale of these metrics. So as I mentioned before, you go from raw data to enriched data to intelligent data, but you need to take one final step beyond that. And the way that we like to consult with our clients and get them to take that final step is to really show them the power of what an ecosystem can do for you when it comes to your digital marketing. So what you're looking at here is basically Synthesio sitting in the middle of an equation that is really kind of an API push-pull situation. We at Synthesio, as a social listening platform, are pulling in all of this data from 197 countries and 70-plus languages across social media and mainstream media, and we're digesting it, we're synthesizing it, and we're displaying it in a way that's easy to understand. And then we're going to take that most salient, most actionable data and allow you to push that out to the platforms that you use every day in your business. So this is about developing a marketing ecosystem that allows you to distribute this data effectively. Now, one of our partners in this data distribution ecosystem is Marketo, and that's why we're on this call today. And one of the use cases that I mentioned earlier was taking your segmented audiences from your social listening platform and pushing them into a platform like Marketo. What we've done with our API is we've basically opened up the ability of our clients to not only enrich their contact records with social data, including the history of mentions that a particular lead or contact might have made, but also the ability to harvest that data about leads and improve the relevancy of conversations with those people. So basically what you've now done is you had leads in your database, and now you have what those people are talking about, how they feel about those things, and how frequently they're talking about these things, because we've provided that qualitative evidence to back up the quantitative data that you've got in your CRM or marketing activation platform. So that's my wrap-up for today. I walked you through the building of a circuit and the creation of a digital marketing ecosystem, and hope there's some questions out there from the audience.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. Well, there are, in fact, questions from the audience, so let's get to those in the remaining time. First one, this looks like it's for Divya. Can you give an example of the type of programs you are running on social under the purchase stage that are working for you?
Yes, absolutely. So on social, we're obviously running some general campaigns which target people based on, interests, custom audiences, and we're running them across different social platforms like Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. And then some of the more interesting ones that we're also running are multi-channel programs, which we're running. So we say somebody sends out an email, we then say, okay, how many people did not open this email? And then we push those ads actually on social. So we have to remember that people are not just engaging on email anymore. They're also all over in different platforms, and social's become obviously a very big platform where people are spending a lot of time. So when we push out these ads on social, a lot of times we get a lot more engagement on social from these channels. And obviously there's retargeting programs, and then for nurture too, we do something similar where we send out our nurture emails, and then if people don't interact with them via email, we push those out on social as well. So all these are performing really well for us.
Great. Thanks, Divya. Okay, this next one is for Greg. What are the main use cases and perhaps some of the more exciting use cases you see people using a social intelligence ecosystem?
So, I just mentioned earlier before about how you can enrich the lead data that lives in a platform like Marketo or Salesforce with really the entire history of mentions and user biography and demographics from our platform. But I think that the most exciting use cases that we've seen are people who combine several of our ecosystem partners. So, for example, we have a lot of people who use our partners in the customer service space, whether it be Spreadfast or Conversocial or Hootsuite. And a lot of brands are now using Twitter as their primary customer service channel. So it's great for the companies that are using these engagement products to be able to pull in not just the history of mentions, but be able to act on that directly within the same platform. So that customer experience element with enriched information about the people who are complaining about your products or have problems with your products. And then you have the enriched information about leads going into Marketo, and I really kind of like the combination of the two in building really a strategic database around not just existing customers but incoming customers, and then using kind of a third of our partners, which is a new one in Domo, and really integrating this business intelligence that you're getting from all three platforms into kind of a single view.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Okay, this next one is, we have a small team. What do you do if you don't have a lot of content? Divya, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, I could totally take that one. So, that's a great question, and a lot of times at Marketo we need to be smart too because we don't have a very big content team, even though it seems like that we do, because our content team of 2 is just amazing. But what we do in those cases is, like I had given you an example of, the healthcare industry or the educational industry. Now there are a lot of topics out there that can be used in general, like if you're talking about benefits of marketing automation or the 5 principles of engagement marketing. It's just about packaging it in a different way and changing some of the maybe one or two paragraphs or the heading to make it sound that it is for a specific audience. So we had a campaign running for sports where we were trying to engage with people who were trying to sell sports seats and stuff. And obviously we didn't have an asset that was speaking to them. So we took one of our assets like the 5 principles of engagement marketing, and we changed the headline and we talked about how to engage your fans instead of just saying how to engage consumers. And with our change in the headline and the copy and everything and a few other changes inside the content piece, we actually made it sound like it was just made for that particular audience. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. You can just, you just make certain changes to your ad copy and headline and make sure that people feel that it's geared towards them. So you can totally do that even if you don't have tons of content.
Thanks, Divya. Okay, and then I think this is going to be the last question for today just because of time. And this one is for Greg. Is there a process or a workflow for reporting on benchmarking data?
I wish that I could point you to a specific URL to define that process. But, as I mentioned earlier, every business, every agency, every company is going to have a different definition of what they consider to be key performance indicators. When it comes to benchmarking, I really feel like the thing that is important for people to understand is that it's a step-by-step progression. It's become a very big buzzword in the industry recently, and you hear a lot of people talking about it that, I want benchmarking, but, it doesn't come out of a box like a Christmas present. It takes time to build a benchmarking program, and I think that when it comes down to this process or a workflow for a benchmarking program, it really is first about internal agreement about what metrics you're going to track. You need to have kind of a defined mission when it comes to social listening about the KPIs you want to look at and the data sets that you want to explore. So the important thing to do is say, I'm really interested in share of voice or reach of messaging, or I'm interested in the share of voice for a specific audience group. It really is a lot like doing a lab report in high school. You need to have a problem in mind with a suspected hypothesis in order to really drive pulling insights out of data. So the last thing I'll have to say about benchmarking is this, is that if you do it right and you've spent enough time collecting data over time, it allows you to kind of jump out of this silo of reaction that every time something happens, you need to come up with a strategy to counteract what's going on, whether it be a crisis or something good and you're trying to leverage it. What social listening and benchmarking does over time is it allows you to differentiate between the consistent noise and chatter that goes on across social media and the trends and things that are important to people. So without that ability to see that long-term data set, benchmarking really goes out the window. So we need to, A, define what the metrics are, and B, come back down to earth when it comes to your expectations of benchmarking.
Awesome. Okay, well, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much, Greg and Divya, for all of those helpful insights. We will follow up in the coming days with the answers to any questions we weren't able to get to during this time. And I did want to remind you all that there is a brief survey that you'll see in just a moment, and we would really love your feedback on today's webinar. Thanks for joining, and have a wonderful day.